Welcome in to episode 88 of In the Gun. You can already tell if you're watching on YouTube, something looks a little different, right? Just me and the beer truck standing here in your blocks on YouTube. For those listening, wanted to inform everybody that Wes Euler will not be joining us tonight. Other duties with NFL prospects, keeping him busy up in the Steel City. Meanwhile, Schuyler Callahan also on the road. So what we're going to be doing is putting this together to let you know our picks for the week. First, we're going to recap last week's picks and let you know how we did, or in some cases, didn't do. And this is, after all, coming off the win over Pitt, heading into Texas Tech, a team that we haven't beat since 2018. So once again, we're going to try and populate this week, as we have in recent weeks, with as much content as we possibly can. That being said, before I toss it over to Beer Truck and check in on you, see how you're doing, I want to remind everybody that BetOnline, thanks to BetOnline for presenting this episode of In the Gun ITG 88. With that being said, Big O, how you doing, man?
Still high after that victory, my brother.
Not long no see, right?
It was one of a kind.
I mean, he left Morgantown. How much sleep did you get Saturday night?
Zero. Maybe
0.
2 hours.
And then he ends up driving to North Carolina, driving back to Southern West Virginia. So how many hours did you log on Sunday on your commute?
It's about 7 hours.
Yeah, with no sleep.
Well, plus whatever was, from midnight to 4:30 driving home.
That's all, right? That's all. At least you don't drive for a living, right, Mr. UPS? So
thankfully, I don't. That's
not anymore. He's a manager now, folks.
That's the glory of being a supervisor. I'm
But
not
I
a
will say
manager,
this.
supervisor. I still do train. I like getting on the truck every once in a while, man. It is fun. It's good exercise, and it's good to get out. I don't like being cooped up in the office too much.
I bet you
know
don't.
what I'm saying?
So
like
we
to
got
be
to hook
out.
up on the field Saturday night at Pitt. Before we get into the picks, once again, I'm still not done. It's midweek, and I'm still not done talking about savoring this victory over Pitt. But one of the things that I liked about it were a lot of former players were on hand. There were a lot of recruits there. So the post-game atmosphere in the locker room was kind of nuts. It was more crowded than usual. But there were a lot of folks like Owen was down on the field. Chris Neal was down on the field. I mean, these are just a few that I ran into. Julian Miller was down on the field. So it's always great to see some of the familiar faces back in town, especially when they're back in town, to shout and scream and enjoy an outcome like we got against the Panthers. Our first win in the backyard brawl since 2012, making Pitt the first team in college football to suffer 2 losses to the Big 12 this year. But that was a great time, Big O.
Man, it was so much fun. Like we had talked about last week, the energy, the electricity that was going to be there. You knew it was about to pop off, but when you got there, when you started to see it unfold, it was almost like, this is what I remember. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And then going down on being, fortunate enough to be on the field, I got to catch up with Mark Magro. Noel was there. Bobby Hathaway.
Yep.
Justin Hensley was down there. All kind of BS and many more of those guys were down there. Just kind of catching up, reminiscing about, old times. When the team was starting to come, getting ready to run out, like you kind of start getting those goosebumps again. Like, man, I remember what it felt like to literally run out in front of a packed house. I mean, the stadium was off the chain, man. It was absolutely electric. And the greatest thing about a Mountaineer victory is the week after feels so good. Feels so good.
Well said. And in the post-game show, I didn't mention this in our previous episode. I wanted to point it out. John Antonic does the show along with Andrew Caridi and myself. We do the post-game wrap-up after Tony and Coach Wallace finish. And Antonic made a good point. He was like, look, when it comes to this rivalry, you're talking about John Antonic, a guy who wrote the Backyard Brawl book. He's literally written the book on the topic, right? Nobody knows the history of the brawl like John. And he said, I don't think people really, from a player standpoint, understand what this is until they lose one. And that was a great point. Well, here's what I was saying, Owen. Pitt, I don't think really got the brunt of it, because he said after you lose one, if you talk to any of these guys who have gone through it, they spend the next year just hearing about nothing but that. So you suffer through that, and it really, your perspective of the game is so different. And Pitt's perspective, like let's talk about this, Owen. it had been, over a decade since the game was played at all. And now we play it for the first time in Pittsburgh last year. So Pittsburgh wins. Well, those Pitt players didn't understand what that was like to spend the entire off season. So I thought that was a valid point on his part. And I think that that's part of the reason that maybe we had even, I don't know if you can have an extra axe to grind because you don't need one against Pitt, but it just helps you turn the screw even a little more because now, you're sending them off to that same fate that they sent you off to a year ago. But yeah, I saw Noel as well. And each one of these guys, like I told Julian, I said, just your presence on the sidelines worth 3 sacks, right? And Noel, I can't help but think of the 88-yard run that bailed us out, or at least set the table to bail us out with the Bittencourt field goal. And all these guys just represent not just great memories and Mountaineer history in general, but even great memories in the backyard brawl. But without further ado, I'm trying
Jed,
to stop for a
Jed,
reason.
I want to just quickly touch on what you just said,
Yes,
because you said, "Oh yeah, they have to, they got to think
I
about
didn't
it
say it.
for a
Antonic said it.
year." Okay, John. Okay,
Yeah,
all right. I've had to hear about that effing game for 15 years now,
and you didn't have an off season to get him back.
buddy. Like it's the worst taste. I mean, it doesn't even matter. I mean, yes, getting the win last night is great, but for me personally, it'll never. There was just so much that was lost
Without
when that
question.
game happened. It's one that'll haunt you forever. But that's the severity of those games. Like I get to his point 100%. Once you lose one, you know exactly what it means.
Well, you hit
To
on
lose
something
it all.
critical for the seniors that lose
Yeah,
one. They're not coming back.
yeah,
There is no off season to sulk over it and get your revenge or
yeah,
exact that pound of flesh 12 months later. In this case, 54 weeks later, it's over. There's a sense of finality to it, and obviously with what you talked about, there was so much at stake in that one. But I think that ordinarily, if you're cycling through and playing this game every year, and every kid who stays at West Virginia for 4 years plays 4 of them, 2 there and 2 here, you're right. Even if you do that, just like you guys used to do, if you're the senior group that loses it, you don't get to do that. You
never
don't get
again,
to do
man.
that. But
Never again.
so yeah, we could do without losing one. But I think under the circumstances, what he was pointing at, I don't want to speak for John, but I think what he was saying, most of the kids involved in the rivalry don't even know what it is
No, absolutely.
because it's been gone for so long. So
Yep.
first of all, we tried to reintroduce him to him last year and educate him on the history of it and bring people in to speak to him and let him really understand the gravity of it, because it was another game to them unless they grew up in West Virginia, and even to that extent they hadn't seen it played in so long. But yeah, it's under those circumstances, not playing the game for 10 years with a bunch of guys who didn't know what it really meant, to have so much on the line last year in Pittsburgh and then let it slip through your fingers the way they did. They suddenly and quickly understood everything the backyard brawl is about, because they never stopped hearing about it for the next
Yeah.
12 months. But I'm sure they'd much rather hear that, hey, congratulations on that big win against Pitt last year. But either way, you're going to hear about it nonstop. You make a great point. If you're playing it every year for 4 years, even then, if you lose as a senior, and those rivalry games just. But that's not to say you didn't have your moments against them before that. But you're exactly right. That final taste is something you're going to remember. But I think we've done a good job of dodging what I've been trying to dodge here. That is, we have to first recap last week's picks. And the way this is structured, if you don't know by now, each of us make a pick. I try and pick or forecast which Big 12 offense is going to pass for the most yards. Owen tries to, we call it the signal car of the week. Owen tries to pick the runaway beer truck of the week, the Big 12 offense that'll rush for the most yards. Wes tries to pick the stingiest Big 12 defense, which will allow the fewest points. And Schuyler tries to pick the Big 12 offense that will score the most points. So at the end of the episode, we'll give our picks for next week. But first, let's recap how things went last week. And then we're going to take a look, unfortunately, at the standings. So for starters, I picked last week. I drew it out of a hat. I said literally, I had 14 teams in my blue, up in my closet up here, my blue ITG trucker hat. And I said, here is the offense that's going to throw for the most yards. And we all got giddy and excited because who did I pick out, Owen? Out of the hat.
WVU.
WVU. I kept a piece of paper. And of course, you guys were saying it might be the one time I actually cheer for you to win.
Yep.
But it did not work out that way. I mean, we've talked at length about how that box score looked like it came from the late 1940s. Very different style of football game, a sluggish rock fight of a football game. Both sides kind of tried to take the air out of it and had success in doing that. So the Garrett Green injury led to Nico coming off the bench stone cold as the backup. That impacted our game plan, our play selection. So though we had some big things planned in the passing game, now all of a sudden you're leaning on your offensive line, and for good reason. You're leaning on your running game and your depth at running back, and you're asking your young quarterback to make a couple critical RPO reads and help move the chain. So you're not looking to play pitch and catch and just, go up top and go deep on these guys. I mean, I thought EJ Horton was going to have a role as our speed guy with his first appearance against Pitt, and he almost did. I mean, we tried to take a couple shot plays to him. One of them, there was pressure, and Nico overshot, and the other one was a sack. I mean, we max protected on that. And you ever use the term green dog, Owen? As opposed to a blue dog, like a green dog blitz. When a guy has you in man coverage, but you stay into block, and he's like, heck with it. Now, since my man key is gonna block, I'm gonna blitz. Well, a lot of people call that a green dog. Well, that blitz, we max protected with a 3-man route, and that's what happened. Jalen stayed into block, and they green dogged off of him. And so we ended up with a free runner, and Nico was under pressure, so we didn't get that shot play off to EJ. But there were some things we tried in the past game, but the long and short of it is we didn't exactly blow them up through the air. Matter of fact, it was 60 yards passing for West Virginia. And that the last time we won a game with that few yards passing, I think, was 2008 against Syracuse. Speaking of Noel blew a big run in that game to rescue us late in that one, too. But so here's how it shook down in the Big 12. Oklahoma threw for the most yards last week with 476. Central Florida was number 2 at 349. TCU number 3 at 314. Kansas at Nevada. Kansas threw for 298, and Baylor ended up with 270 to finish number 5. The scoring works. If you don't finish in the top 5, you don't score. So not only did I not score, but I said last week, and I'm going to hold myself to it, I said if I finish 14th out of 14 teams, I'm docking myself a point. So that's what I'm going to do. -1. Get the big buzzer at home for Jed. -1. I'm sticking to it. So -1. So we're going to revisit the standings to date, which I think I'm being shut out now through 3 weeks. So Owen, you picked as your beer truck of the week to rush for the most yards. You picked the Kansas Jayhawks at Nevada. Tell you what, Kansas struggled a little bit. I mean, Nevada's
Dude,
not.
it ended up being a game, which was
It
crazy.
ended up being a game, yeah. And so Kansas ends up running for 143 in that game. And here's how that shook out. Top 5, you place in the top 5, you score. Cincinnati led all Big 12 rushers with 273 yards and a loss to a MAC school. Baylor number 2 at 270. Central Florida 251. Central Florida was just lighting it up again. They're looking really solid offensively, and that was without John Reese Plumlee, their starting quarterback, who's a runner. So good for the Fighting Gus Malzahn's and Herb Hand and the crew down there. TCU came in at number 4 with 250 yards. Texas Tech, who comes to town this weekend, solid running game by Texas Tech against Tarleton State, 221 yards. Number 5. So Owen, you finished not number 6 but number 7. So that leaves you outside the scoring range. So you had 0 points. So 0, not -1 at least, but 0. So we go to the defense of the week as selected by Wes. Wes picked Baylor against the Long Island Sharks. I tell you what, Baylor didn't do too bad defensively. He's trying to pick the fewest points. Well, the fewest points allowed by any defense were by Texas Tech against an overmatched Tarleton State team. They allowed 3. WVU, of course, allowed 6. Great job by Jordan Leslie and that West Virginia defense in the rivalry game and the 17-6 win. And coming in at number 3, Baylor allowed 7 points, as did one other team. So tied at number 3 is West, with the Baylor Bears allowing 3 points, or 7 points, I should say, in a 30-7 win in another game that was weather delayed. And the way that scoring works, West finished number 3. So number 1 gives you 7 points. Number 2 gives you 4. Number 3 gives you 3. So West ended up with 3 points. And he already came in hotter than Texas chili through 2 weeks. So he adds to his lead, right?
He's been killing it this year.
He's been crushing it. He's been smoking hot, man. Smoking hot. And then finally, we round things out, Schuyler with this offense of the week, the one he projected to score the most points. He picked Kansas at Nevada. Okay, let me see here. So he finished in a tie at number 9 because Kansas scored 30. So Oklahoma led the way with 66, Central Florida number 2 at 48. Texas Tech finished number 3 at 41 points. Again, Texas Tech was their first win of the year, and they sorely needed that. But the truth of the matter is that Tarleton State team is one they kind of needed. They had that season opening loss at Wyoming, which was kind of a curious game to schedule, and then they had the loss at home to a very good Oregon team. And then what ends up happening is they get their first one of the year before they come to Morgantown, so they'll come in at 1-2. But they had the third most points at 41, number 3. BYU, I'll tell you what, they stunned a lot of people, myself included, by going to Fayetteville against Arkansas and winning the game. They scored 38 in a 38-31 victory. TCU against the Fighting Dana Holgersons, 36 points in a blowout win over Houston to finish number 5. So Schuyler didn't finish in the top 5, as we said. He was tied at number 9. Kansas scored 30 points, as did Baylor in a 30-7 win. Let me double check something before we cut to a break here. Actually 31 points. It wasn't a tie. So he finished number 9, but either way, he's outside the top 5. So the standings, I think we're going to put them on the screen here. The standings through the first 3 weeks. Something Wes is going to see or want to see, something I'm not. I'd like to run and hide here, but I've tried everything in the free world. I can't get it clicking.
This would have been my week to gain some ground on Wes, but of course, goose egg.
It's a long season. I could have -5 before it's over. It's at this rate, right? But I'll say this. You know what? If West Virginia wins an ugly game every week,
oh hey,
some way indirectly or directly, I end up losing this thing. I'll have at it. But that being said, one of the things we want to do is take a break. On the back side of the break, on the other side of the break, we're going to return to ITG episode 88 with this week's picks. We have them in from Schuyler. We have them in from West, hot off the press. And Owen and I are going to select ours for the week right after this break.
Nobody supports the blue and gold Mountaineers like Toothman Ford. With over 20 NIL deals and counting, Toothman Ford continues to rally behind our student athletes. And it's time we rally and support the dealer that supports the Mountaineers. Not only does Toothman Ford offer the best prices in the state on pre-owned, their never over MSRP campaign on new Fords guaranteed to save you thousands. Drive with pride all season long, knowing you're supporting the dealer that fuels our Mountaineers. Toothman Ford, where cars cost less, in Grafton and at toothmanford.com.
For more West Virginia Mountaineer football content, be sure to follow us on Twitter at In the Gun Podcast.
For nearly 20 years, Fortis has been the nation's leader in providing guaranteed roof performance programs for commercial buildings. Fortis offers roof performance solutions that feature extensive initial and ongoing reconditioning for commercial buildings as an alternative to traditional replacement, with long-term performance guarantees that are backed by global leader Lloyd's of London. Fortis offers a comprehensive range of roof performance management programs that provide financial security, extend the life of our customers' roofs, and make a significant impact on ROI. Fortis is currently improving performance and increasing ROI for customers at more than 4,800 locations, with more than 140 million square feet protected, including many Fortune 500 companies that have turned to Fortis to save money, gain financial certainty, and extend the life of their existing roofs. Fortis has helped customers save more than $520 million in capital roof replacement costs for an average ROI of over 250%. To learn more, visit fortis.us.com. Fortis, roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed.
Let's go, Mountaineer fans. You're tuned in to In the Gun with Wes, the Runaway Beer Truck, and the Signal Caller.
Welcome back to In the Gun, and we are about to make this week's picks. I'm looking at it right here. Before we do, we'd like to thank our friends first at Fortis Roof Performance and Financial Security. Make sure you check out what they got going on. A lot of cool stuff. And our friends at Toothman Ford and Grafton, where cars cost less is, of course, Grafton. J.R. Toothman and the crew doing a great job down there. So check out their inventory, both new and used. But getting into this week's picks, let's go ahead and start off, Owen. I'll tell you who I'm going to roll with as my offense of the week to pass for the most yards. So, of course, this dooms them. But you got the old battle for the iron skillet. And it sounds like we're going to be making a couple picks around this game with TCU hosting SMU. And sadly, it's because of realignment. It's one of the great rivalries in college football that looks like it's going to go to the way of the dinosaur in coming years, with SMU moving to the ACC and TCU, of course, in the Big 12. So from a non-league standpoint, it doesn't look like this has much left to go. So I'm going to go with TCU and Chandler Morris against SMU to throw for the most yards. I still think they have enough clicking from an offensive standpoint with Sonny Dykes against an SMU defense that's much better against the run, really, than they are against the pass. But either way, I think TCU's due for another one. They played decent football through the year and the win over Houston last week. Of course, they had balance. They ran the ball really well, too. But I'm going to go with TCU for my signal caller of the week as the team in the Big 12 I project to throw for the most yards. Owen, who you say for your beer truck of the week, the Big 12 team to rush for the most yards?
I'm jumping on board with you. I'm hoping those horned frogs will destroy SMU.
I'll tell you what, between the two of us, we're
This
not
is
saying much about SMU, are we?
Yeah, this might be the first time you and I are on the same
I
deal,
think
so
so.
we have to root for each other, obviously. And Garen, good luck, buddy. I'm sorry we're picking against your boys, but I got to win, dog.
Garen Justice, yeah. Well, I'll say this, Owen. Me picking TCU might actually be great news for you, because if they find a way to beat Garen Justice and SMU, it almost certainly, because I picked them, won't be through the passing game. It'll have to be on the ground, right? So I've doomed them. I've cursed them. So I really like your chances by picking TCU on the ground. So let's round things out with our picks from. Well, let's start with Wes. Actually, he picked. I have it written down here. Wow, good pick. Iowa State. For all the struggles that Iowa State has on the offensive side of the football, which is many, they don't have any struggles on the defensive side. John Heacock really still laying the wood and keeping them in games they otherwise probably wouldn't be in. And they're playing Oklahoma State, who really is coming off a tough loss at home to South Alabama. Guys, that Oklahoma State team gave up 243 yards rushing in that loss and just got boat raced 33-7. They're struggling on both sides of the ball, but maybe especially on offense as they head to Iowa State.
It was a rough week for the Big 12 this week, I feel like.
Yeah, it sure was.
But hopefully they can bounce back here. I'd like to see, a mutual friend we got there, Rocco Beck, at the quarterback. I hope they can get something rolling offensively a little bit. But that's a great pick by Wes. They know defense in Iowa.
Yeah, they certainly do. That odd stack configuration that he runs. But I agree with you. I'd like to see Rocco do some decent things, but it's just with everything that's played out outside the lines, with this whole, we joke about the 5-card culture and all the gambling issues. Well, first of all, Hunter Deckers was slated to be their starter behind center, not Rocco. Rocco was supposed to be the number 2. And they've lost some critical pieces on both sides of the ball. And it's just, nobody really saw this coming as an organization or a program that was built on culture, right? It just goes to show you how sometimes brittle things can be in college football. And I do hope good things happen for Rocco, but so far they've struggled on the offensive side of the football. So good pick by Wes, picking Iowa State to allow the fewest points this week in the Big 12. And let's close things out with Schuyler's pick for the offense of the week. And this is kind of interesting, Owen. He picked Oklahoma. Nobody's going to dispute that Oklahoma is one of the more dynamic, explosive offenses in the Big 12 still, even without Lincoln Riley. They've done a decent job with Jeff Levy running that offense with Dylan Gabriel behind center. He's putting up some big numbers and some big yards. Well, they're going on the road to Cincinnati. Now, Cincinnati is coming off that loss to Miami. Now, in a strange way, of course, believe it or not, that is a rivalry game. I'm not so sure how much Cincinnati still considers that or not, but they've dominated that in the last decade and a half. And I do kind of wonder, rivalry game or not, this is the game, Owen, that Cincinnati fans have been talking about really since the announcement was made. They were joining the Big 12, and then when the schedule came out, this Oklahoma trip to Cincinnati, that blue blood coming into town to the Queen City. Cincinnati's been looking ahead to this for a long time, and you got to kind of wonder, was it a little peek ahead? And maybe that's why they didn't play their most crisp version of football in that loss to Miami. Maybe. I mean, I don't know, but Oklahoma is heading into Cincinnati with all their weapons. Cincinnati, I'm not so sure what they are as a football team at large, but I have a lot of faith at the point of attack that they have one of the better, if not the best, defensive line in the Big 12. So it'll be interesting, but Oklahoma's, that's a chore. It's an interesting matchup here.
Yeah, interesting matchup. Man, I loved playing at Cincinnati, dude. I love their atmosphere, their stadium. Right there, nestled, tucked in the campus. Anytime OU is coming to town, there's going to be some hype. They could have looked ahead. That's very plausible. And you get the feeling that's what's kind of funny. It was just a rough week for the Big 12 this week.
Yeah.
Who knows? Everybody kind of just looking ahead of the schedule a little bit. Who knows? But they let one slip, which is unfortunate. But I'm going to tell you right now, you better have all the big guns out for Oklahoma.
You better. And I agree with you, Owen. I worked a couple games at Cincinnati. I attended one early on as a fan, and it's kind of neat. It's right there in a college neighborhood around college housing. It's one of the oldest on-campus facilities or structures in all of college football. So you make your way down through those back streets into the stadium. I mean, Nippert, I don't think seats quite 40,000, but there's a rustic, feel to it, and it's just a cool place. And they really love their football. They get behind their Bearcats in a big way, and it's one of those places that you might not think could get that loud, but it can. It has its own little personality and own little vibe. But you're right when you look at how things shook out in the Big 12 this week. Of course, one of the shining moments was West Virginia's win in the backyard brawl against the ACC's Pitt Panthers, of course. But Kansas State, previously ranked number 15 Kansas State, went on the road to Missouri and lost a heartbreaker on a 61-yard field goal. And then you mentioned, we talked about the Iowa State loss to Ohio. That's a tough place to play for P5s. It's a weird road game, guys. We got it coming up in a handful of years. It's not the most modern of facilities, but you kind of get ambushed if you don't know what to expect when you step in here and you're a P5. And I think to some extent that's what Iowa State stepped into. And then going on with some of the other struggles, in addition to that, you have Miami knocking off Cincinnati. We talked about the South Alabama Oklahoma State game was probably just about as bad as it gets. And you know what? I think that looking ahead or even sleepwalking a little bit, Texas had the massive win in Tuscaloosa over Alabama. And then, of course, they kind of sleptwalked through the Wyoming game. I mean, through three quarters, what was that, tied at 10 in the fourth quarter? That was a dogfight. And then they finally separated with superior talent to win 31-10. But so, yeah, not the most banner week for the Big 12, but more opportunities come before we get into league play for some of these other teams. Of course, West Virginia kicking things off in league play against Texas Tech this week. And Owen, this is probably our first taste in talking about Texas Tech and what's to come with the Red Raiders. But they returned most of what they had last year with that incredibly strong finish at the end of last year. They strung all those wins together. They had a great showing in their bowl game. And they were one of the darlings of the offseason. The media loved them. There was a lot of hype. It almost felt like a bit of a coronation. I mean, they didn't quite enter the season in the top 25, but they were receiving a ton of votes. As a matter of fact, I think they were receiving the most votes of someone outside the top 25. So technically, they entered the season at number 26. And then they went in and suffered that overtime loss at Wyoming. They lost to Oregon. They're 0-2, and now they rebound against the Tarleton States of the world to go 1-2. But I'm not sure what to make of them other than they're a talented team with a ton of experience.
Yeah, there's definitely something going on there. Who knows, like some sort of leadership issue or what's happening. But big key for me, Mountaineer fans, we need you there again. We need we need that place rocking like it was this weekend. If you do that, I guarantee these boys are going to show up and show out again. And now we're at the point where, okay, we got a little bit of confidence. What happens if they do come in here and we end up gang busting, right? And getting that third win right now, we're looking at We're 3-1. We're going into kind of the meat of our schedule. The season's not looking too bad right now.
Yeah.
Still week 4 to play out, but there's some things shaking up. It's a lot different than what the critics all said before the season.
Yeah, and if you can, this is another tremendous opportunity. You hit on something critical right there. This is kind of our white whale. It's been our white whale since Neil Brown got to town. I mean, for different reasons, we've let this game slip through our fingers a couple times, and we were boat raced a couple times, and then we always came back and won one of those, and we just haven't figured these guys out. The Tony Fields injury cost us in Lubbock. That was a critical part of that matchup. I'm just, there's always something that we let work against us in this game. So this is our opportunity to capture that white whale, to move to 3-1, to stack yet another penny. The more you win, the more they mean, right? I mean, that's what Rich always told us. The more you win, the more they matter. And so right now we've won 2. And that last one we won was pretty big because of who we beat. So I always say that the measure of a great fan base is not what you can do in your marquee games against your biggest rivals. It's what you can do against the games that aren't as marquee and aren't as against your rivals. I mean, some of these folks out west that have, like, I got a buddy of mine, Owen, that he lives in Minnesota, and a couple of years ago when they got hot with PJ Fleck and were winning all those games and having their best season in years, they were talking about some of these crowds that they were bringing into town against a highly ranked Penn State team, and I'm like, well, that's great, but what do you do the week before it and the week after? I mean, that's the measure of a good football fan base, and that's what Mountaineer Nation is. I mean, that's what I've always tried to explain to them, the element of consistency. And so just as you hit on right there, if you can bring the buzz, I mean, anybody who was in that building Saturday night in that win over Pitt, you pretty quickly recognized that we had 12 guys. We had 12 players in the field. We really did. I mean, that crowd played such a critical role in the outcome, setting the tone of the game, and then the outcome of the game. That's not to be understated. And if we can get back to doing that on a regular basis and showing the world why it's so hard to win at Mountaineer Field, that wasn't the greatest football game we played. That wasn't the most efficient, time capsule worthy game we played. It was an ugly football game that we had to scrap and battle and find a way to be the last man standing. And one of the reasons we were the last man standing is because we had 61,000 maniacs screaming so loud we couldn't help but be standing. And if you can approach something in that stratosphere each week, and if Texas Tech comes into town and they're ambushed by that, they really won't know what hit them.
Yeah, and fans listen. It's a new year. Whether you trust the climb or not, hey, right now we're doing what we need to be doing. Buy in, right? Because that's what's great about college football. There's a new season every year, right? Yeah. New expectations, new things to consider that can or will be. And right now we got some things that are creeping up on this team that, in my opinion, are starting to look a little bit special.
Yeah, we sure do. And, speaking of special, we still got a lot to go this week from a content standpoint. Obviously, Schuyler's going to be back to join us. Wes is going to be back to join us. Later in the week, we're going to have our preview of the Texas Tech game, which we'll post on Thursday. We'll take a deep dive. We'll look at the offense, the defense, the special teams. We'll all be discussing what we view as the critical matchups. We'll be breaking down some tape, discussing what we see, what we like, what we don't like. So you don't want to miss that. And make sure that not just are you subscribing on YouTube, but also you're going to Believe.com. You want to make sure that you're subscribing on the Believe site with Owen leaping over top of that poor fool from Rutgers, and make sure that you're taking part of that as well on the audio side. So we're burning candles from both ends. So make sure you get the video side and the audio side. But we have a lot of content coming later in the week with our preview, and then of course Phil Steele on Friday. Phil's going to join us, and that's just been such a massive hit. And Phil is just, he's the man. He's incredible and fun to work with. He's so laid back, and he just likes talking ball. And I mean, it's great when Schuyler and I get together and get to sit down with him on a weekly basis. But yeah, thanks for the signal there. What I want to remind you is we will be back with more content. We're closing things out now, but when we come back, we'll be, of course, rejoined by Schuyler, by Wes. Thanks for joining us for this one. and we look forward to joining you for the next one. With that being said, this has been your new favorite West Virginia podcast. You've been in the gun.